Now, as you may have noticed, I am not Bob Wacker, as much as I like to play him on TV. In fact, Bob was unable to be your MC today. He's breaking a 13-year streak as the MC of this event, but I will fill in for him. I know it's unsettling. Dave Yunke actually just reminded me that I am not as funny as Bob Wacker. I think he's feeling a lot of hurt. Is that true, Dave? Are you feeling hurt? But I know it's unsettling. It's a big change. You know, we've all been going through a lot of change lately, and here we have another change. And it's been interesting in this age of conspiracy theories. A lot of conspiracy theories have actually bubbled up as to why Bob Wacker couldn't be here today. So before we go any further, I want to take a moment, kind of on a serious note, and address a few things, okay? First and foremost, Bob was not abducted by a militia group to sway the District 2 election, okay? That did not happen. I don't know where that one came from. He wasn't canceled. Yes, he said some colorful comments on Chris Thornberg's Twitter account when the Dodgers fell out of the playoffs, but he was actually not canceled due to those comments. And lastly, and this one is probably the most unsettling, and frankly, if you were involved in this rumor, you should be ashamed of yourself. Debbie Wacker did not leave Bob Wacker for Pete Davidson. Okay, so anyway, I wanted to clear the air, get all of that stuff just out in the open. None of it is true. I am here with you today. I'm excited to be here. You're in good hands. For those of you who don't know me, Ryan Caldwell. I am the CEO of Wacker Wealth Partners. I live here locally in San Luis Obispo. Love it, just like I'm sure all of you do as well. We have a packed crowd tonight, record attendance for the Central Coast Economic Forecast. It doesn't surprise me, frankly, because the economy is suddenly interesting again, right? We went through a couple of years where the stock market was up, the housing market was up, everything was going great, GDP was up, and it got a little boring. But now the economy is having a moment. It's having a bit of a crisis. And what do we do when our neighbors and our friends are going through a crisis and going through a hard time? We get together and we talk about them, right? We have a gigantic gossip session, and that is what we're going to do today. We're going to have a gossip session about the economy. And it's just in time for the holidays, right? Because I know we're all very tired of talking about politics over the Thanksgiving table. We are going to equip you to talk about the economy this Thanksgiving. So you are welcome. Personally, I'm actually pretty excited for the holidays. Typically I have to go to Thanksgiving or Christmas and listen to my, punk nephew Ethan talk about Bitcoin and how I need Ethereum in my portfolio, and do I want to go for a ride in his new Tesla that he bought with his Bitcoin, and he's thinking of retiring at 32 with his Bitcoin. So Bitcoin's down 70% from its peak. I'm very excited about Thanksgiving this year. It's going to be awesome. So you guys, probably a little less vindictive than me. I know we have a lot of policymakers. We've got a lot of elected officials in the house today. Thank you so much for your service. We got a lot of business leaders all looking to read the tea leaves about where we are heading. And have no fear. We got a great lineup. We got Tanner Osman here to talk about the local economy, give you that local analysis that we all find so valuable. We got Chris Thornberg. Yes, he came back. Can you believe it? He's going to share his views on the state and national economy. We got a beautiful little dessert right in the middle, right sandwiched in the middle. We are going to hear from 5 entrepreneurs out of the Center for Innovation Entrepreneurship at Cal Poly, and they are going to be pitching their businesses to you all. We're going to give you an opportunity to vote on which one will walk away today with a $5,000 prize. So a lot of fun things in store for you. Lots of insights, lots of wisdom, a bunch of economic zingers to give to those Ethans in your life. And before we go any further, right, we always want to start with gratitude. And I just want to acknowledge that a lot of people, an amazing production here, a fabulous MC. None of that can happen None of that can it takes a village, right? None of that can happen without the volunteer board of the Central Coast Economic Forecast, led by their fearless leaders, 2 of them this year, Naccasha and Josh Tang. Josh, for those of you who don't know him, you can applaud. We're going to applause for them many, many times. But Josh is like the Jeff Bezos of San Luis Obispo. At least that's how he described himself to me earlier. Josh is the site lead for Amazon here in San Luis Obispo. He's also the director of technology there, and he has co-chaired the board with Naccasha, who probably needs no introduction. He's the attorney we all love to hug, founder of Carmel and Naccasha. And so Josh, why don't you come on up and tell us a little bit about your year as co-chair of the Central Coast Economic Forecast.
Wow, that's quite an introduction. The Jeff Bezos of San Luis Obispo. I don't think I said that, but maybe I did. So thanks for everyone for being here. I really think Ryan is the right guy for the job this year. I don't know what you guys think, but I'm pretty thankful to have him here. So I'm sure you've noticed these past couple years, they've been probably what I would call interesting at best, maybe miserable or downright awful for some of us individually and maybe as a community. So, when I think of these times, I think of just the criticality of this sort of information that we're bringing. So I'm really thankful we're here. One of the things these times do bring out, though, is a sense of realizing the things maybe you've taken for granted in your life. I don't know if any of you have noticed, but those have come to the forefront. So I want to kind of start off with just a little bit of thankfulness for some of the things we have today. One of them is just this room, everyone here, the community leaders living in the best place on earth, San Luis Obispo County. So thank you to everyone who's here, stepping up, leading in their community. I also just want to thank so many of the people who make this happen. I want to start by thanking our sponsors. You've seen their logos all over the place, and we have, in particular, several platinum sponsors I want to call out: Bank of America, AMF Media Group, Amazon, Cal Poly, Dana Reserve, and KSBY. We can't do this without them. We 100% rely on these sponsor dollars to make this event happen. So I want to just call out huge thanks to everyone in this room that sponsored this to make this happen. But there's more. You're going to see videos actually from each of these platinum sponsors today. And these videos were made possible by KSBY and Brandon Downing and team. And so I want to give a special thanks. KSBY always is here to make us look good. And they do a surprisingly good job, because I think normally maybe we don't all look great. I also want to call out a bunch of people who do work behind the scenes for us year after year. The SLO Chamber of Commerce and their ambassadors, always here greeting, helping people find their tables. Thank you. We also have the AMF Media Group, who does our marketing, our PR, and event support. We also have community partners who've helped with promoting this event: the Paso Robles Wine Country Alliance and the Chamber of Commerce for the South County, Paso Robles, Templeton, Atascadero, and SLO. So huge thanks to all of them. We want to also call out our media sponsors: KSBY yet again, New Times Media Group, Pacific Coast Business Times. Thank you. I also want to just have a special call out, and we've already talked about, sandwiched in the middle of this program, we have several startups coming. Thanks for all of you for coming and making this a fun event for us. I think we're all really excited to see kind of what entrepreneurship looks like in SLO right now. As always, can't help but thank Dr. Chris Thornberg and Dr. Tanner Osman for showing up and doing this event. When we were talking to Chris just a week or so ago, he mentioned that coming to this event feels a little bit more like a family event or a community event for him, because he's been doing it with us for so long. And it has sort of a special, different feel. And we feel the same, Chris, so thank you. It's always great having you here. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly to me, I want to call out maybe the person that I owe the most to, which is Ziyad Naccasha. Z, at the beginning of this year, when I was set to take on this chair role, I said, I actually don't know if I can do it this year. As like I said, been interesting years. Z very graciously stepped up and offered to split the job with me. And what we both learned very quickly was what split meant was Z did all the hard work, and I worked hard to take credit for it. And so here I am. I hope I've done my job well. But in a spirit of rectifying that, I would actually like to ask Z to come up on stage, say a couple words before we get started. And thank you, everyone.
Definitely have to adjust the mic for this one. It's not true that I'm happy that I don't have to do this anymore. I really enjoyed being the chair and being the co-chair this last year. It's been a lot. It's been a very interesting couple of years for sure. Josh, thank you for your kind words. He's very humble, as Jeff Bezos, and he has been an incredible partner this year. He's got tremendous input, tremendous vision for this board, and I'm excited to see what next year has in store. Also, Jolie Ditmore has been vice chair. She's been amazing. She's served on so many committees, helped Judy Mahan with the 3 Minute to Win It. She spoke at the sponsor event this year. Every board member, if you'd all please stand up, you've provided incredible guidance. This board has been so collaborative. They have been so amazing to work with. And I'd like to announce them, and I'd also like to announce their companies, because without the companies and the backing of their staff, they couldn't do what they do. So we really appreciate their efforts and all the things that they've done in this community. So again, co-chair Josh Tang from Amazon, Jolie Ditmore from Bay Consultants, treasurer Steve Harding, who shows up at every meeting, does all of our financials, keeps us honest, from American Riviera Bank, Secretary Bruce Ray from Vision, a public company. He's the CFO for that company. Jocelyn Brennan from HRM Group, Kara Wright, Farm Supply Company, an amazing board member. All of them are amazing. Eric Daniels from PG&E has provided incredible guidance this year. Jim Dunning from Cal Poly, done so many things for the organization over the years. Maria Kelly, Kelly Consulting. Michelle McCovey-Good from TNS Structural. Judy Mahan from Cal Poly, CIE and SBDC. Steve McCarty Davis, Commercial Real Estate. Wyatt Mello from the Mello Group. Anthony Palazzo, Cal Poly. Cal Poly has a lot of board members on us. Thank you. Emily Renault, Boys and Girls Club of Mid-Central Coast, and Jeff Toma, Toma Electric. And finally, I echo Josh's sentiment for all of that. Please join me in thanking the board. Also want to echo Josh's sentiments and offer special recognition to our Platinum sponsors and to all our sponsors and guests that are here today. It's amazing. Thank you. Let's kick this program off with a welcome video from one of the Platinum sponsors, Bank of America. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Greg Bland, President of Bank of America San Luis Obispo region. On behalf of my Bank of America colleagues, thank you for joining us today. Between the recent pandemic and the current economic headwinds like supply chain issues and inflation, local companies have adapted, gotten creative, and have displayed incredible resiliency. As we well know, the Central Coast is a great place for business growth and opportunity, but it's also a region where we help each other out. At Bank of America, we partner with our business clients to help them expand and prosper. We're proud to also serve individual customers as they buy homes, save for retirement, or send their children off to college. I'm proud that Bank of America could help sponsor the Central Coast Economic Forecast, and I'm eager to learn from today's presenters. And now, on to the forecast.
All right, let's hear it for Bank of America. Josh and Z, I can't see you, but would you just please stand for a second? There we go. Where's Z? There he is. All right. Well, I get the privilege of representing the board and formally thanking you two for amazing leadership this past year. One more round of applause for Josh and Z. Okay, a few housekeeping items before we get moving. I want to remind you that copies of the presentation material is going to be emailed to you after the event, okay? So you're going to get an email. You're also going to get a video. We're recording this, which is really exciting for someone being up on the stage. There's a lot I can't say that I want to say, but we are in fact recording it. You're going to get a copy of that, so if you miss anything, don't fret. I also want to mention, and this is where I'm not going to make a gross catheter joke, but I want to mention that we're not going to be taking breaks. If you need to use the restroom, just stand right up and go take care of it. We are going to do Q&A, so if you all look on your place settings there, you've got a program. In the program is an email address. That email address is ccefquestions@gmail.com. If you have a question through any part of today's program, feel free to email your question to that email address. We are going to have time at the end to go through your questions. And lastly, the evaluation forms. These are so critical. You're going to get an email. It takes you 2 minutes, but the value that we get from the evaluation forms is quite tremendous. We do have Caltrans extending the stoplight today as you exit. I know that's always a challenge is getting out of here. You don't have to leave early. They've extended the stoplight. And that is a direct result of feedback that we got from you all in those feedback forms. So make a difference. Fill out your feedback form. All right, without further ado, we're going to get this party started with Tanner Osman. Tanner, he's got a long, illustrious bio, okay? I'm just going to read it, and your job is to be amazed right now, okay? Tanner is the manager of regional and sub-regional analysis at Beacon Economics and at UC Riverside School of Business Center for Economic Forecasting and Development. Right on cue. Thank you. He is also a postdoctoral researcher at the Lewis Center for Regional Policy Studies and an instructor in the Department of Urban Planning at UCLA. He leads Beacon's quarterly regional outlook, which tracks the economics in the state's largest metros and keeps his thumb on the pulse of labor markets across the state in his role leading Beacon's monthly Economic California Employment Report. Since Tanner was last with us, you recall previously he did a thing with Lyft. Well, since he's been with us last year, he's been leading the charge on Beacon's relatively new Texas Employment Report, a monthly analysis of the job market in the nation's second largest economy, behind California, of course. Among many other research projects, this past summer, Tanner authored a deeply comprehensive analysis of California's manufacturing sector and its impact on the state's economy. That analysis, to the surprise of many, including myself, found that we remain the largest contributor to U.S. manufacturing industry in terms of both employment and output. So go California. Tanner Osman, please step to the stage and drop some wisdom on us.
Okay, apologies for that. If I hadn't got the clicker, you'd have been looking at the picture of me for 25 minutes. So, good morning, everybody. It's great to be back here in San Luis Obispo, and I echo Chris's sentiments about just what a pleasure it is to come to this part of the country and to speak to you all. And as Ryan mentioned, this morning I'm going to be speaking to you about the San Luis Obispo economy. And without further ado, thank you. So I'm going to really be talking to you about sort of 4 main topics this morning. And I think to really understand San Luis Obispo's current predicament, there's a little bit of California context that is required. So I'm going to start first by not speaking specifically about San Luis Obispo, but the context within the region's economy finds itself. I'm then going to sort of drill into San Luis Obispo, talk about some of the great resiliency and the opportunities that exist in the local economy, But I sort of end that part of the talk with a question about the extent to which the economy or the economic trajectory in San Luis Obispo is sustainable over the coming few years. And that has a direct relationship to what is happening in the local real estate market. Over the past couple of years, house prices in this region, as has been the case in many parts of the country in California, have seen really, for lack of a better term, crazy growth. And that is going to have implications for the economy, and there are things that can be done locally to try and address that issue. And I'm going to close out my remarks today by talking about what the future might look like for the region's economy. So before I talk about San Luis Obispo, let's talk a little bit about California. Now, it used to be the case in California that we spoke about a north-south divide, that there were cultural, social, economic, and political differences between the northern and the southern parts of the state, and oftentimes that was exemplified by comparing LA with San Francisco or the Bay Area with Southern California. But over the past 20 years, the real shift and the real dichotomy in California has been between the coast and the inland communities. So if we were to look since the turn of the century over this last 20 years and look at employment growth in California, we can see that inland communities have increased the number of jobs in inland communities has increased by around about 50%. At the same time, jobs added in the coastal communities in the state have grown by 15%. If we were to compare population growth between the inland and coastal communities, we would see that the inland communities have been adding population at a rate 4 times quicker than the coastal communities have. And a big reason for this comes down to housing. That in the inland communities, they've been adding many more housing units than has been the case within the coasts or in the coastal communities. So inland communities have been adding housing at 3 times the rate that has been the case in the coastal communities. And one consequence of that and the constrained growth, relatively speaking, with respect to housing on the coast is house prices. We've seen that house prices, the gap between house prices in coastal communities and inland communities has been increasing greatly over this period of time. Now, this next chart here tracks migration at the California level. So we're not looking at the coast and inland communities here. This is looking at net migration. So in the chart on the left, what we're looking at is workers by different income categories, and we're counting up the workers in each of those income categories that have left the state and those who have arrived in the state from other parts of the country. And what we see is that California has a big deficit when it comes to lower income workers. There are around about 250,000 low income workers, 250,000 more low income workers who have left the state than have moved to the state over a 10-year period. And when we look by education category, what we see is that California is losing workers with lower levels of formal education. That we are a net importer from the rest of the nation of people with graduate degrees, but people with less than a high school degree, people with a high school degree have been leaving the state in relative terms. And this same picture that we see in California is starting to play out in coastal communities as well. And I'm going to show you a slide similar to this, but specific to San Luis Obispo a little bit later in my presentation. Now, the immediate effect of this picture, and this picture being employment and population growth in inland communities and relatively slower growth in coastal communities, has been how the 2 parts of California have recovered from the pandemic. If you were to look at inland communities and look at those jobs that were lost at the outset of the pandemic, the inland communities in its orange line have more than recovered the jobs that were lost and have been adding jobs compared to where those economies were prior to the pandemic, whereas the coastal communities are still yet to recover all of the jobs that were lost at the outset of the pandemic. Now, this has nothing to do with labor demand. This has nothing to do with the desire of employers on the coast to hire people. The problem that coastal communities are facing is that they don't have the workers in order to fill the positions which or which employers are seeking to fill in these coastal communities. So again, if you were to look at this chart on the right, this tracks the labour force. The labour force is the people available to work in a given economy. In the coastal communities, there are still 2.5% fewer people available to work than was the case prior to the pandemic, whereas in the inland communities, the labour forces have recovered. And this translates directly onto some of the headlines you'll see about jobs in coastal communities and difficulties that places like San Francisco and LA have had in recovering the jobs. This is ultimately a labour supply story. And just to reinforce this point, this chart here tracks for a variety of regions in California how many jobs have been added since February 2020. So February 2020 was the peak prior to the pandemic, and in the following months, particularly the couple of months after February 2020, we saw wholesale job losses throughout the state. This chart here tracks how many jobs have been added compared to that pre-pandemic level. The left chart shows the communities which have added jobs since that period of time, and what you can see is tens of thousands of jobs have been added across Riverside, Sacramento, Stockton, Fresno, inland communities. The chart on the right tracks the communities which have performed less well since February 2020, and if you were to look at the bottom of the list there, you see LA, you see San Francisco, Orange County, the East Bay. These places still have a deficit of tens of thousands of jobs compared to where they were prior to the pandemic. And ultimately, and where we're going with this is, or where I'm going to be going in this presentation is why this sort of big picture is relevant to what is happening here in San Luis Obispo. Now, in the short term, the immediate effect of this has been two things. And the first, I mentioned before, is the inability of employers to fill positions, which they've opened. But I'm not sure if you can read the small print in the chart on the left here. This is a picture that was sent to me by a friend of mine who lives in Orange County. And it was a billboard, maybe not a billboard, it was an advertisement which was put outside of a Del Taco. And they were advertising graveyard shifts because of their inability to find workers to fill those positions. They were willing to pay workers anywhere between $21 and $25 an hour to work the graveyard shift in Del Taco in this Orange County community. So one of the immediate effects of the inability of the coastal communities to add workers, to grow their population, is a chronic labor shortage, which is greatly increasing costs for local businesses. The long-term effect could be waning political influence. Now, last year, in 2021, after they did the 2020 census, many of you may have seen that California, for the first time ever, lost a seat in the House of Representatives. But this process, which played out nationally, and that is because California's population has been stagnating relative to the rest of the nation. But this process will play out locally as well. If it continues to be the case that we see population growth in the inland communities over time, you're going to see redistricting, which is going to shift sort of seats away from coastal communities to inland communities. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about where San Luis Obispo fits in to this picture. So San Luis Obispo's economy is or employment in the economy is very heavily concentrated in 3 or 4 sectors. So if you were to take government, education and healthcare, as well as leisure and hospitality, they account for around about 1 in 2 jobs in the San Luis Obispo economy. And if you were to throw retail trade in with those 3 sectors together, they account for around about 6 out of every 10 jobs in the San Luis Obispo economy. And leisure and hospitality in particular is a strength for the local economy. So if you were to compare the share of workers employed in leisure and hospitality in San Luis Obispo with the state, there's around about 50% more people in proportionate terms employed in leisure and hospitality in San Luis Obispo than is the case in California. Now the chart on the right tracks employment growth in San Luis Obispo over the past 10 years. I added a red arrow to this slide to show that there are the same number of people employed in the San Luis Obispo economy today as was the case in the second quarter of 2018. So over that 4-year period, we haven't seen growth in the number of people who are employed, gainfully employed in the San Luis Obispo economy. There has been sideways growth. Now, San Luis Obispo is just on the cusp of being at that point where the employment levels are about to reach their pre-pandemic levels. But again, this story here doesn't really have anything to do with the willingness of employers to add positions. What this story has a lot to do with is the contraction of the labor force. So if you were to look at this chart on the right here, it tracks the labor force. Again, this is a number of people available to work in San Luis Obispo. And you can see it's still around about 1.5% lower than was the case prior to the pandemic. So there are 1.5% fewer people actively looking for work in San Luis Obispo today than was the case prior to the pandemic. The unemployment rate in San Luis Obispo is 2%. It can scarcely get any lower than that. Anybody who is willing and looking for work in San Luis Obispo is able to find gainful employment. And just to give you a sense of the problems or the challenges that employers are having in filling positions locally, take a look at the chart on the left here. This is as of September 2022, so this is data from 2 months ago now. This is showing the number of job openings in the San Luis Obispo economy. There were 3,500 job openings by employers in San Luis Obispo's economy in September. The number of unemployed people in the county's economy was 3,300. So there are more job openings in San Luis Obispo than there are people who are able to fill these job openings, which again, as I'm going to come back to, becomes problematic as the region's economy seeks to sustain its growth over time. Now, one of the more interesting aspects of this presentation for us is incorporating local voices. So we can look at numbers, we can look at data, but we also like to hear what people who are on the ground, who are working in San Luis Obispo on a daily basis have to say. And we spoke to Chuck Davison about tourism and hospitality. Again, remember that around about 16% of the county's jobs are in leisure or tourism and hospitality. And tourism and hospitality has performed, I think, surpassed many people's expectations over the past couple of years. Now, one of the reasons for this is this chart on the right. If we want to know how Americans coped with the lockdowns at the outset of the pandemic, we only need to look at this chart here. Now, what I find the most interesting about this chart is that there wasn't a return to the normalcy afterwards, that Americans got the taste for alcohol and they sure liked it, and that chart seems to be growing ever more. And of course that has positive effects for the local wine industry. So how do we assess where the tourism and hospitality industry is today? Well, again, based on our conversations with Chuck, he tells us that we've seen record revenues, record hotel occupancies, record revenue per available room. So the tourism and hospitality sector has been going has been growing phenomenally over the last couple of years. But Chuck did also highlight that there could be a couple of potential headwinds. The first one is posed by the strong dollar. So during the pandemic, or the beginning of the pandemic, I should say, when international travel was constrained, there was a lot of people who were traveling within California, and that was a net positive for San Luis Obispo. Now that we have a stronger dollar, that makes it more appealing for people in the US to travel abroad. So perhaps some of those dollars that were coming from within California to San Luis Obispo might find a home in some other place, potentially around the world. But what the strong dollar also does is, and one of the other influences of the strong dollar is it means that we could have fewer international visitors. If it's more expensive for people to come to the US because the dollar is strong, that could be a potential headwind for the local industry. But a recurring theme, I hope throughout my presentation, that was flagged also by the other people, community members we spoke to, was that one of the biggest problems that the industry is facing today is one of labour shortages. Agriculture, as we mentioned, as Americans have been drinking more, this has also been beneficial for wine crops and local production. And in fact, 2021 was a record year for San Luis Obispo agriculture. But despite the strength that was seen in the agricultural sector in 2021, there are some challenges, again, which I think will be consuming the time of local leaders. And two of them that were raised by Brent Burchett to do with the local climate, essentially. The heat has had an impact, particularly this summer, on grape yields. And another issue that many producers locally are facing, but are also facing up and down the state, has to do with water. And I think many people expect that over the next sort of decade or so, we're going to see an intensification of legal fights over water rights within the state. Now, one potential solution that Brent raised is to do with recycled water, and perhaps that's a solution that exists locally. But again, Brent also red flagged that the sector has also had difficulty filling positions and finding the workers to help with crop production. From an economic development perspective, we spoke to Melissa James. She highlighted the region's historic strengths in agriculture, tourism, government, as we discussed, but she also gave us some insights into some of the emerging parts of the economy and the areas of the economy where we could expect to see growth. So obviously with the Diablo nuclear power plant remaining open, that is going to be a tailwind, I should say, for the energy sector. But there's a lot of interesting stuff happening at Cal Poly right now, particularly surrounding clean tech. And if you were to look at this chart on the left, this is tracking venture capital investment in San Luis Obispo County. And we've seen a rapid increase in the amount of venture capital that is finding a home in San Luis Obispo over the past 3 or 4 years. And a lot of that has to do with some of the innovation which is emerging in places like Cal Poly. There are other potential tailwinds for the local economy. The work from home dynamic that we've seen, whereby people could, during the early days of the pandemic, leave a job in San Francisco and work in some other part of the country, has actually seen an influx of talent to the region. That is something that might be harnessed as we look forward over the coming years. If we have more people who are working in the tech sector who find a home in San Luis Obispo, there are opportunities to sort of nurture that talent and help to develop other sectors of the local economy. But finally, we spoke to Wade Halton, who highlighted that in 2021 and 2022, we've seen record local tax revenues. And we've seen records in sales tax revenues, which are highlighted in this chart here. We've seen record revenues with respect to property taxes, with respect to TOT taxes as well. And all of that money and that sort of local windfall, some of that has been invested in workforce development. But as this chart will perhaps reveal, that surge in sales tax revenues that we saw in 2021 is probably going to see a dramatic slowdown in the next couple of years. It's unrealistic to expect that we're going to be seeing increases in the 10% range. So that is going to be a challenge locally with respect to being able to sustain spending levels as a result of the influx of cash that was seen during the pandemic. A couple of other things before I wrap up my discussion of the San Luis Obispo economy. Again, a couple of things that we've heard in the news, the emergence of people working from home. So if you were to look in San Luis Obispo, which is in this chart on the right here, we see that there was a pronounced increase in the number of people working from home, and that has been sticky. So we've seen the number of people who identify as working from home increasing by about threefold over the past 2 years as a result of the pandemic. We've also saw an enormous surge in e-commerce activity following the pandemic. Many of us were unable to go outside. There was a lot of business closures, and that translated into an increase in e-commerce activity. We are starting to see that normalize. So if you were to look in the chart on the left, you can see San Luis Obispo is tracked in yellow. You saw that big increase in e-commerce activity, and we are starting to revert somewhere close back to the trend. Why do I highlight these two indicators? Well, a lot of the discussion at the beginning of the pandemic was surrounding what these two trends meant. If we're going to be buying more stuff online, what does that mean for bricks and mortar retail? If people are working from home, what is that going to mean with respect to the demand for office space? What we've seen in the commercial real estate sector is, it's at this point at least, a story of the dog that didn't bark. That if you were to look at activity in the retail sector, we haven't seen much change in rents locally. Vacancy rates in the retail sector have been flat for a couple of years. And if we were to look in the office space as well, we haven't seen too much change during that pandemic period. There was vacancy rates maybe ticked up a hair, but we haven't seen the mass abandonment of office as many had predicted at the outset of the pandemic. And so, in summary, with respect to San Luis Obispo's economy, I think it's an economy that's been incredibly resilient over the past couple of years and has seen a strong, pronounced recovery. There are opportunities for growth around new sectors of the economy, particularly with respect to energy. But where I'd like to take this conversation now is to talk about whether the region has the right conditions for sustained growth over the next decade or so. And that necessarily leads to a discussion about the local real estate market. Now, if you look at the chart on the left, you can see that the median house price in San Luis Obispo today is nearly $900,000. On a year-over-year basis, house prices in the region increased by 15%, but that was after they increased by 20% in the preceding year. So we've seen a pronounced shift in the price of owning a home in San Luis Obispo. If you look at this chart on the right, what it does is it tracks the house price growth trajectory prior to the pandemic and compares it to what actually happened. So had we had no pandemic, and Chris is going to talk to you about the macro factors and how interest rates and stimulus and the health of the consumer added fuel to the fire of real estate markets. But had there been no pandemic, the chart on the right is telling us that house prices would have been $209,000 a year lower than they are today. The orange line there is what actually happened. It's the proverbial, up in a straight line dynamic where we've seen an enormous increase above what we were expecting house prices, or how we were expecting house prices to perform prior to the pandemic. Again, I think it's worth reinforcing house prices are $200,000 a year more compared to what they would have been had they stayed on the pre-pandemic trajectory. So what does this mean for the cost of borrowing a home? Well, the chart on the left here tracks the mortgage payment, the monthly mortgage payment associated with owning the median-priced home in San Luis Obispo. So this is based on this calculation is based on a 20% down payment and a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage. What you've seen is that over the last 2 years, that monthly mortgage payment associated with owning the median-priced home in San Luis Obispo has almost doubled. It's gone from around about, prior to the pandemic, you were sort of around about $2,800, up to nearly $5,000. And that, of course, is just a mortgage payment. That doesn't include any of the other costs associated with owning a home. And there's been little relief in the rental market either. If you were to look at the chart on the right, this is tracking local rents. Rents have now ticked up above $2,400 in the county. So whether you're a homeowner or somebody who is looking to own a home for the first time, or somebody who's looking to rent a new apartment, you've seen an enormous increase in house prices over the past couple of years. Now, what have these increased house prices meant? Well, it has meant that we've seen a diminishment in sales activity locally. So on a year-over-year basis, the number of home sales in San Luis Obispo has decreased, I should say, by around about a quarter. Now, the chart on the right tracks home sales by quarter, and you can see that really big line sometime in 2021. We brought forward a lot of housing sales during that period, so there was going to have to be some sort of recalibration in the housing market. But one of the immediate effects that we've seen with respect to this increase in house prices is a slowing down in activity in the local real estate sector. And it's led many people to ask, well, are we going to see a decrease in house prices? Are we going to see a correction whereby house prices, crater 20, 30%? But this chart here, I think, would pour sort of cold water on that idea. Despite the fact that house prices have increased so much, we still live, or in San Luis Obispo, you still live in an incredibly supply-constrained market. If you were to look at the months of housing supply, there's still way fewer houses available than there were prior to the pandemic, and we have started to see a tick up in the time that properties stay on the market. But again, if we were to compare this to pre-pandemic levels, we're not even close to a place where we can say that the market has started to rebalance. So it's possible that house prices can go sideways or even tick down a little bit, but a major correction, the likes of which we saw during the Great Recession, is unlikely given the fundamentals that we see in the market. So how do we tie all these different threads together? Well, I would say that the San Luis Obispo economy does have some demographic headwinds over the next decade or so. And again, this comes back to a conversation about the housing market. If you were to look at this chart on the left here, this shows the number of houses that were built by different time periods. And as you can see, over the past sort of 10 years or so, very little new housing stock has been added to the local economy. The chart on the right tracks the share of housing in a given community and how much of that housing is devoted to multifamily housing. And in this respect, San Luis Obispo lags way behind other communities on the coast, as well as the state of California. Around about 1 in 5 housing units in San Luis Obispo are devoted to multifamily housing, compared to around about a third at the statewide level. What does this mean, or what is this going to add up to? Well, if you look at this chart on the left here, this tracks population growth over the last 11 years for California and some of the Central Coast communities here. San Luis Obispo is the bottom line there, the green line. Since 2015, the population in San Luis Obispo has been stagnant. Over a 7-year period, you'd have to go back to 2015 to find population levels in San Luis Obispo that you find today. In fact, housing or population peaked in San Luis Obispo just prior to the pandemic. Now, I don't care what your sort of views are on the economy. Population growth, regardless of your political persuasion, is never seen as a strong economic indicator. If a region is losing population, that is not normally seen as a healthy sign. And it's even less healthy when you look at where that population growth is decreasing. So the chart on the right here tracks population change by different demographic groups. The region has been adding higher educated workers, but has been losing lower educated workers over the past 10 years. And if we were to go back to some of those conversations that we had with local officials in the agriculture industry, in the leisure and tourism industry, this is a worrying picture, because this speaks to precisely what they were talking about. The acute labor shortage that exists in those sectors of the economy is because the profile of worker that would typically work in those sectors of economy have been shrinking within the region. Another way to look at how the demographic change has been occurring in San Luis Obispo is through this chart on the left here. And this chart tracks the region's population by different age group. And what it tells us is that the population of people who are under 25 years has been shrinking over a 10-year period. That working age population, those people aged between 25 and 64, they've been shrinking as well. The place where we have seen population growth with respect to age has been with retirees, that the region has been absorbing, relatively speaking, people who are not part of the working population. And just to compare San Luis Obispo with the state of California, the chart on the right here shows that the population of retirees in San Luis Obispo is significantly higher than is the case in the state of California. So around Retirees account for around about 21% of the local population compared to 15% in California. But the big, or perhaps the more worrying statistic, not that having retirees in the community is worrying, but the more worrying and damning statistic is the working age population. That profile of the people who are aged between 25 and 64, who are what we consider to be the working population. In San Luis Obispo, that population is at around 46%. In the state of California, that number is around about 53%. And this, again, if you sort of couple and sort of dovetail these statistics with the population growth, does, I think, paint a worrying picture for the San Luis Obispo economy. So I think overall, my assessment of the San Luis Obispo economy is that it has the foundations for a strong, vibrant economy. It has its existing strengths, and there are very clearly sort of emerging sectors of the economy, as we saw with the investment, the venture capital investment that we've seen over the past number of years. But I would say that the current trends, particularly that population growth trend, that trend is not sustainable. The county cannot continue to lose population and expect to have a vibrant and resilient economy over an extended period of time. And nobody's saying for a second that San Luis Obispo needs to become a mega metropolis which absorbs millions of people. Not every economy, and most economies aren't mega metropolitan regions. But what it does mean is that for the sustainability of the local economy and for the local economy to continue to grow, the region has to do a better job of providing housing for workers. Now currently, the region does import workers from neighboring counties. There are people and workers who commute to San Luis Obispo from the northern parts of Santa Barbara County. And that is great so long as there's housing in northern Santa Barbara County, which enables people to live there and commute to San Luis Obispo. But what it also means is that San Luis Obispo is not in control of its own destiny. It's reliant on neighboring communities to provide housing for the workers who live here. And I would just end on one final note that while there are some sort of headwinds surrounding the ability of the region to absorb new workers, this is a challenge or a problem with a solution. This is, we speak to many local economies and you're sometimes scratching your head at how it is that they're going to be able to engender economic growth over an extended period of time. If you were to take if you were to look around the US, there are many communities around the US who are giving away land, in some instances giving away housing to try and attract workers. San Luis Obispo doesn't have that problem. People want to be in San Luis Obispo, but in the longer run, the ability to absorb workers is going to be critical to sustaining local tax bases, but also sustaining local influence at a statewide level. And with that, I thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to the Q&A. Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you, Tanner. Well, now I know where all the waiters went. That was helpful. I also heard Tanner say, drink local, people. That was my big takeaway. All right, well, that was absolutely fantastic. If you have questions for Tanner, I want to remind you, ccefquestions@gmail.com. Send them on in. And with that, another word from our sponsors.
Hello, I'm Jeff Armstrong, president of Cal Poly. The Central Coast Economic Forecast is a recurring reminder of how important it is to pause and think about where we've been as a community and where we intend to go. Through a pandemic, major economic shifts, and a whole lot of challenge and opportunity over the last few years, we've repeatedly linked arms to come up with solutions together. I am so proud of the world-class students, faculty, and staff at Cal Poly who go far beyond their academic endeavors to impact our local economic ecosystem in powerful ways. We're excited that 5 of Cal Poly's Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship startups will share their pitches with you this morning. We know their success is tied deeply to support from the City and County of SLO, community mentors, donors, and supporters. Thank you for partnering with us and the Central Coast Economic Forecast to keep the innovation and cooperation going.
Yeah, let's hear it for Cal Poly. Thank you, Cal Poly. This is the moment we've been waiting for. This is the big triple chocolate cheesecake that I promised you right smack dab in the middle of our program. That's right, folks. It's 3 minutes to win it. I did lobby for some game show music for this segment, but I didn't get it. But we have the treat of getting to hear about what is going on at the Cal Poly Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. We're going to hear from 5 entrepreneurs, and we get to vote as to who will go home with the big prize. And so to tell us more about that, I want to invite Judy Mahan up to the stage, please. Let me tell you a little bit about Judy, if you don't know her. She's obviously here to talk about the CIE and all of that fun stuff, but you may not be aware that Judy actually leads the programming and assists in the launch and the business development of all the startups that are happening there in the 2-year CIE incubator program. She also oversees the SBDC, which I didn't realize has 40 expert consultants on their rolls. They help over 600 clients with 5,000 hours of consulting annually. Quite a job there, Judy. All right, so why don't you tell us a little bit about the CIE?
Thank you so much. Good morning. Thank you so much. My name is Judy Mahan. I'm the Economic Development Director for the Cal Poly Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, also known as the CIE. So the CIE is very well known on campus for supporting Cal Poly students who want to explore the entrepreneurship path and take their first steps towards launching a startup. We are very active campus-wide in all colleges, engaging with students and faculty to facilitate those efforts. But the CIE is also extremely engaged with our regional business community. We operate the Hot House downtown, a place where we run our 2-year incubator program for startups, a place where we run our Small Business Development Center, the SBDC, and a place where we offer co-working for all those remote workers. So I'm going to share a little bit of data today about the SBDC, although Ryan already shared some of the data points. But then I really want to highlight and focus our attention on the incubator program, as the startups that are going to be pitching here today are all currently in that program. So the SBDC, we provide no-cost one-on-one business consulting to entrepreneurs and business owners throughout SLO County. We have 38 consultants right now on the roster that meet with these businesses daily to provide that support. They're experts in business strategy, digital marketing, mechanical engineering, supply chain management, you name it, we have an expert on board. We receive grant funding from federal and state agencies, as well as from SLO County and the city of SLO, and we use that funding to pay our consultants to do this work. So since January, in just the last 10 months, we've worked with close to 600 companies. We've provided close to 5,000 hours of consulting, including not only our consultant one-on-one business advice, but also consulting through student engagement on campus and the faculty that provide support to these businesses. And we've supported this year 3,468 jobs. And we've helped our clients obtain just over $24.5 million in capital funding. And I can confirm that about close to 80% of that funding comes from equity funding. That's funding from angel groups, venture firms. So this is going to be one of our best years since we launched 10 years ago. So our incubator program, we have 17 startups in our incubator right now. And you'll be seeing 5 of our most promising startups pitched to you to win the $5,000. Our incubator startups are all SBDC clients. This allows them to obtain as much support as they need from this big consultant pool that we have. They meet weekly with their assigned lead mentor, and they participate in monthly deep dive coaching sessions specifically designed for them. We focus very intensively on helping our startups prepare to pitch to investors They need funding. If we can't get them funded, then everything we do has, little to no purpose. And not just in terms of the pitch itself, as you'll see today, but also that is part of the work, but in terms of their business model, their revenue model, traction, IP protection, all these important facets of the business development of the startup. So what's next for CIE? I want to take the opportunity this morning to thank our County Board of Supervisors for providing us this year with very significant ARPA funding. This funding is going to support our efforts over the next 4 years to launch and grow our new incubator programs. We have launched, but we're going to continue to grow our AgTech incubator program in Paso Robles, our aerospace incubator program in Grover Beach, our clean tech incubator program coming in Morro Bay, and our specialized med tech program in San Luis Obispo. So we're actively working with 12-week accelerator programs that throughout the U.S. that you've likely heard of, Y Combinator, Techstars, Starburst, and many more. We're creating partnerships to try to bring these startups in ag tech, aerospace, clean tech, and med tech to our region. We're ramping up our focus to truly diversify our local economic portfolio. The vision is that all these startups go through our 2-year program and then will stay and continue to grow here in SLO County. We definitely have the resources and capacity to do this. This is a really, really exciting time for us. So thank you again to our Board of Supervisors for their support. This is a key component of creating future head of household tech jobs for our region. And now, please enjoy this next short video introducing our 5 pitching startups. In the interest of time, our startups will then pitch back to back following the video. So please now meet our contenders. Video roll, please. Thank you.
Today, it's a battle of big ideas as 5 local startups compete for a $5,000 cash prize. Welcome to 3 Minutes to Win It, showcasing 5 of the Central Coast's best and brightest. See their passion, hear their business plans, and be ready to choose your favorite in a vote-by-text poll. Now, let's meet our contenders. Adam Steger and his team at TRIC Robotics are transforming the farming industry by combining ultraviolet light with automation to eliminate the use of pesticides. Amelia Degenkolb co-founded Novocuff to advance the field of maternal health and is developing a device to prevent preterm labor. In his quest for affordable, sustainable food, Stan Kaplita of Zeste Farms co-developed the Anaconda Farming System, an indoor vertical farming concept for growing a variety of crops. Anna Baytosh's Artifex Technologies has created a software platform that expedites the as-built drawing process for construction professionals. And finally, ACREcloud co-founder Jim Cogan is developing revolutionary software products at the intersection of fintech and agtech to solve the problems of modern farmers. So get ready, the competition starts now.
All right, hello everyone. I'm Adam Steger, the founder and CEO of TRIC Robotics, and we're helping farmers control pest and disease using ultraviolet light in place of chemical pesticides. It not only gives them a way to be more profitable, but they can grow our food in a healthier way and with less impact on our environment. So if we look at what farmers are doing today, we see they spend about $84 billion every single year in a fight against pests. And they're losing that fight because the pests are becoming more and more resistant to the chemicals that we use to control them. It's not just a problem for the farmer, it's also a problem for us because it's a risk to our food supply. And really the point is what we're doing now isn't working. The spraying's expensive, it complicates field management, and quite frankly, it's environmentally irresponsible to be spraying so many chemicals. And the consumers like you and me, well, we're educated these days around all the chemicals that go on our food, so we're demanding and willing to pay more for organic. And quite frankly, the farmers want to farm organically. There just hasn't been a good way to farm reliably with organic methods. And that's why TRIC Robotics took this challenge and came up with a new solution. And that solution is light. And this is Luna. Oops, sorry guys. This is Luna. And it's our pest control solution that uses ultraviolet light in place of chemical pesticides. You can see it's kind of like a giant Roomba. It goes up and down the rows carrying these lights to control the pests, and it also happens at night, so it's not in the way of the farmer's daily field operations, and we provide it as a service. So it's a very low barrier to entry for them. They don't have a steep learning curve or a lot of high costs associated with it. And really the trick behind this is ultraviolet light. And we use this light that's normally blocked by our atmosphere, and we bring it down to Earth, and we can replace 9 of the existing chemicals that they're using on the farm today. So it's not only just great for the farmer, it's also amazing because they can provide the food in a healthier way and with less impact to our environment. Now looking at that, it's amazing to see where we came from. This is where the startup started, really out of this tiny little garage. This was us building the robots that we launched just a year ago on half-acre pilots. And we started with strawberries because they're number 1 on the Dirty Dozen. There's a lot of strawberries in this area. And we just thought that was the best place to start reducing the chemicals. There's more chemicals used on them than anything else. And when we got out, we were so excited by just half-acre sites with these farmers. Of course, they weren't willing to pay right away, but we showed really quickly that we can have amazing results. And you can see here there was a line where we could see the difference between our section and the other section in the field. Farmers started really asking us to adopt, and we knew that we had to scale up. So here you can see we moved to a much larger garage. Here our robots are now tractor-sized units. And I don't think we could have made this pivot without all the support we've received in the Central Coast. The Cal Poly hothouse has been just an incredible opportunity for us to really start growing. And I have to say, we're so excited. We're working with some of the largest strawberry farms in California now. And we're going to be going to 100 acres from half-acre sites just last year. So we're really excited to start growing in the Central Coast. And this is us, and we're really in the right place. 90% of strawberries in this country are grown right here. So it's really the place we need to be, and we're so excited to be because the community has been so supportive and amazing to us so far. So thank you for your attention, and please reach out to us if you want to learn more.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Amelia Degenkolb. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Novocuff. Our mission as a company is to prevent infant mortalities caused by preterm birth. Preterm birth is the leading cause of infant morbidities and mortalities, leading to over 1 million deaths worldwide. I learned about this problem through my co-founder, Donald Lee, who joins me here today, who experienced this firsthand with his wife and twin girls. When Donald's twins, who are 3 now, they were born at 24 weeks and spent the first 6 months of their lives in the neonatal intensive care unit. When Donald told me about the trying experience and the lack of options to prevent the prematurity, I quickly came to the same conclusion that he had. There had to be a better way. So let me tell you more about preterm birth and what Novocuff intends to do to change it. All right, there we go. There are approximately 360,000 preterm births in the US and about 1 million in the EU every year. It accounts for about half of all long-term neurologic impairment in children, and 75% of neonatal deaths are caused by this. In addition to the gross emotional burden, it's a problem that costs $26 billion per year in the United States alone. When we look at the problem, the cause, we find that a short cervix is a powerful indicator for preterm birth, being insufficient to maintain an adequate barrier between the fetus and potential infection. There are few, if any, treatment options that are adequate for treating that short cervix that are non-surgical. If surgery is indicated, which is still pretty rare, it comes with a lot of risks. It's a high cost. It requires access to an operating room and medical specialists. And in addition, it's risky for twins. So people like Donald and his wife didn't have that treatment option. So we see here there's a really obvious treatment gap that both physicians and patients could benefit from. And this is where we come in. The Novocuff solution allows for variable force to be applied around the cervix in order to keep it closed, while a positioning balloon helps change the angle of the cervix, reducing the pressure being applied to it by the growing baby. It can be adjustments and placements can be done in office settings which means you can have a customizable fit throughout pregnancy as the body is changing. I'm going to show you a little animation for a bit of a better view here. And this shows how the device is meant to be placed around the cervix in order to keep it closed and positioned in a way that's ideal for the pregnancy to continue. And the thing that makes us so unique is that we've created a device that's dynamic. It can be adjusted for the changing pregnancies. It has many of the similar benefits of the surgical procedure, but without all of the added risk, the cost, the required resources. So this is really exciting for us. It's intended to be worn for the duration of the pregnancy once the short cervix has been identified, but we found that research has found that even if we could delay birth by just 3 weeks, we can drastically improve health outcomes for newborns. We can increase survival rates by 64%. We can decrease risk of neurodevelopmental impairment by 44%, and we can decrease risk of cerebral palsy by 15%, just to name a few of the health outcomes. In addition, it accounts for approximately $100,000 of savings per pregnancy or per birth. So these are really big health outcomes. When I look at our team here, both Donald and I are technical founders. We both have backgrounds in biomedical engineering. My background is in maternal health device development. I worked with Inpress/Alydia Health, which had a recently exciting acquisition of $240 million, also a slow-grown company. And Donald Lee, he has expertise in silicone medical device manufacturing and has that personal experience that led him to the initial concept and the idea of the Novocuff device. We're supported by really expertise for our council and our advisory board that'll help guide us to success. And we believe here at Novocuff that we can drastically improve health outcomes for newborns while decreasing the gross expenditures caused by preterm birth. We're currently doing a fundraising round to get us through our first in-human trial. This clicker stopped working. And we invite you to join us on that journey if you would like. Regardless, if you just want to learn more about Novocuff, please reach out. I'd love to connect. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
I brought my presentation in case the clicker doesn't work. I would love to take an hour of your time to talk about our business. My name is Kaplita. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Zeste Farms. We believe we're the next generation in vertical farming. We believe that because we think we've learned how to grow indoors without the green premium. And that green premium is that extra cost you pay, extra price you pay for something that's coming out that's sustainable. So we believe we've got a sustainable solution that can match let's say, organic pricing in the market. Now, spoiler alert, this isn't about marijuana. This is what we're going to talk about. What you see in the top left is a vertical farm. This is in Paso Robles. Now, we heard the economic forecast for California, but this is more of a global view of what's happening. And this has been talked about at least for the last 5 to 10 years. And I'm only going to cover a couple of these to kind of give you a reason on why we're so excited about indoor farming. Number one, population growth. By 2035, we're expected to have to increase food production by 70%. Water scarcity. Between 2000 and 2050, the demand for water is expected to go up by more than 50%. Arable land scarcity. By 2050, we will only have half the arable acreage per person needed to meet dietary requirements. Again, I'm sure you've heard of all this. Fertilizer and pesticide, issues there. Adam just spoke about that. Food safety, just in 2018 alone, $3 billion was spent on foodborne illness. Half of that came from produce. And the list goes on. So think about these macro trends. I haven't even begun to talk about climate change. You bring climate change on top of that, and it exacerbates this. Some of these are demand. So you've got demand increasing on one side, and you have challenges on the other, and then you throw climate change on top of it. And then the government reminds us, by the way, food is a national security issue. So our feeling is we're going to run out of land. We're not going to run out of land, but we're going to have challenges on land. We're going to have challenges with weather. What can be grown indoors is going to be grown indoors. We've seen that in northern countries where they don't have everything that we have. And this isn't an issue really for our area, but when you think about other areas of the world, it is an issue. So what are we going to do about it? You think about all these challenges, and you think about our mission of becoming cost competitive. There's a lot of other great companies out there that have gone into indoor farming. But the challenge is they're not scalable and they're not economical. They're not profitable. As a matter of fact, I just heard yesterday there are 2 that are closing the doors, 2 that are very reputable. Fifth Season out of Pittsburgh, and then there's another company in the South that's also closing the doors. There's a lot of venture capital that's gone into this area, over $1 billion, because they see these macro trends. So what you see here in terms of our schematic is our approach to solving this problem. And what we did that's different is we took a number of experts, a number of proven solutions, and we brought them together to come up with a farming solution. So we've got people from Denmark, Canada, the US, Japan, that all came together for this solution. This is the what. And these are leafy greens that are actually alive, and they'll be sold here locally. We're excited about this. We had people come through, and one was Congressman Carbajal, and he came through and tried everything, and he just sat back there and looked at us and said, "This is a flavor explosion going on in my mouth, and I don't even like salad." So, like I said, I could take an hour of your time talking about this. Here's a sneak peek. Now, this is where we bring the how and the what together. Again, this is in Paso. And now I'm back to my original slide. This is where the discussion's gone. What we've tried to do here is create a solution that's resilient, that's economical, and inspires people to eat more healthy. I didn't talk about the nutrition as a demand, but 2 billion people of our roughly 7 billion in the world are either malnutritious, suffer from malnutrition. And making leafy greens, and what I like to say is we're bringing sexy back to leafy greens, but my kids say, "Hey, Dad, don't go there." So how do we do? How does our system help? So let me take you back now to these macro trends. Our system has the potential to produce 40 to 80 times more pounds per acre than traditional farming. We use 90% less water. On arable land scarcity, we don't even need to be on arable land. We're in a warehouse. We can be on property that's already been used. And the list goes on. We have closed loop fertigation and so on. But I want to tell you, this has been very challenging, and this has been a community effort. A lot of you probably didn't realize, but people locally here were involved in the design. First of all, we had tremendous support from Paul Sloan at City of Paso, tremendous support from Judy and her team, and the whole group at the CIE. We had support from Carbajal's team, specifically Greg Haas, support from Bill Toma. Bill Toma was involved in the design of the electrical. We also had Brandon Rogers of BMA, Charlie Johnson of C3, and Matt Reed of Reed's Heating. So it was an incredible team effort. And again, there's a Japanese concept called Karitsu, where you're bringing a lot of different people together to solve a problem, and that's what we did. Where to buy? We are available at Harvestly right now, and that's online. And we are just about through all the gates for Whole Foods. That'll be Whole Foods here in SLO. Our product is right there, a picture of our product, and we brought 5 cases in the back for samples for those of you who want to try. If there's any interest in purchasing, any interest in investing, my contact information is there. So thank you very much for hearing me out, and I hope we have a good rest of the presentation.
All right, hi everybody. I'm Anna Baytosh. I'm a co-founder and chief operating officer of Artifex Technologies. We're a software platform that makes spatial data useful for those in architecture, construction, and design. For a little background on me, when I was getting my MBA at Cal Poly, I took an entrepreneurship class and I absolutely fell in love with this world, but I had no good ideas. So I went to the Cal Poly Hot House and I told them my story, and they said, "Oh great, we've got this engineer who's got all of these great ideas. He's talking architecture and vectors and drawings, and it would be great if you teamed up with him." So we've been at it for about 2 years. We were able to raise, with the Hot House's support,
pre-seed capital of $250K, which was great. That got us to a minimum viable product of our platform that you'll see today. So, to give you some context behind the problem that we're aiming to solve, these are metrics for an average 2,000 square foot house. For a construction professional that has adopted 3D scanning technology into their workflow, this can either be anywhere from an iPhone that takes a 3D scan of the environment all the way to those 3D scanners that you see on the side of the road that are taking pictures of the environment. So they'll approach a building, they'll take about 2 hours to scan. It's a big data point cloud, so they'll come home back to the office and it'll take about an hour to upload. But the problem we're aiming to solve is this 5 hours of translation. So they take this data, and in order to make it CAD ready, this is a time-consuming bottleneck, a low revenue producer, and there's a lack of enjoyment. Architects and designers would rather be designing with this time and not drawing and redrawing buildings they've been hired to recreate anyway. So we're creating a platform to automate that translation layer. We're giving designers the opportunity to import and store their data, instantly visualize it in our drawing portal, and then download into CAD and start editing right away. Here's a demo of our product. It's in beta. This is an architect converting their drawing. This is a scan of a building that they took earlier that day. You see them picking their plan and their section cuts in order to download right away. We see from our beta testers that they're excited about this because this increases their operational efficiency all on the web, so they don't need to download any software in order to get our system conversion to work. We're a software as a service company scaling based on data usage. We find that this is the best way into the market because there are some firms that have a low amount of data and some who have many, many scans a month. So this can capture the entire market. Our traction, we are early, but we're hosting 15 beta testers on our platform right now. We're analyzing an array of workflows, but we have targeted construction, design, and architecture as the best possible way to start. We're welcoming other beta testers on the platform to give us feedback. I know that there are some architects and builders in the area. We would love to hear from you to join our list. There are competitors in the area or in the space that have identified this need but fail to bring automation to the process, and we would like to bring that to our designers. You see some big players in the space in the bottom left-hand corner, but truly we're not necessarily trying to eat that market. Rather, once we gain trust from those designers, licensing that software directly at that level for these enterprise companies to make their workflows better. Gaining trust one designer at a time will give us credibility to land that enterprise client by 2025. We plan to hit our first $10 million in annual recurring revenue in that time. And in order to get that 20% month-over-month growth that we would like to see, we are raising a seed round in order to build a team to launch products so that it's exactly what our customers need. We are asking for introductions to those in the industry who are interested in beta testing, advising, and investing. So thank you again. I'm Anna Baytosh, co-founder of Artifex, where we make spatial data useful. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jim Cogan. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of ACREcloud. ACREcloud is a software as a service company that provides farm management software products to farmers and farm labor contractors. And we're actually this interesting intersection of ag tech and fintech. Ryan, I want to promise you that we are not Bitcoin fintech, so it's okay. We are raising money, though, so if you could introduce me to your nephew, that'd be great. You know, it's really hard to try and show you what ag tech and fintech looks like, so I wore it today. And I want you to see that I've got the blue Silicon Valley blazer on top, and then I'm wearing blue jeans and cowboy boots on the bottom. So this is really the wardrobe version of a mullet. And, you know, if you understand that, you've got a pretty good picture of what we're doing. So ACREcloud has this farm management software platform that was created by our CEO, who is a 6th-generation farmer and Berkeley-educated engineer. He started this platform to manage the work on his 800-acre pistachio ranch that his family owns. And it really identified for him some of the challenges that farmers face as he was working on developing this platform that tracked all of the different resources and purchases on farm. So one of the big problems that he identified had to do with farm labor and farm labor payroll. Now you got to think about, this is one of the most vital and most vulnerable populations of workers in the United States today. And the entire payroll system operates on paper time cards and very antiquated processes. So the result is that oftentimes people are paid late or they're not paid what they're owed. In order to address this, the state of California did what the state of California always does and added more regulation. And to a group of business leaders, I know you're like, of course, that makes all the sense in the world. The problem is that there aren't tools to track work for laborers from farm to farm and farm labor contractor to farm labor contractor until now. So we've created a solution where we actually give each farm worker a card that they can use to swipe when they come on farm, and it doesn't matter how many farms they work on, it doesn't matter how many farm labor contractors they work for, we will track their work across multiple farms, and it even has a bank logo on it so that it's a payment card, which means they're probably not going to lose it. We had a beta test last year. It worked out very well. We're looking at launching this in the first quarter of next year. In fact, this is the road ahead for us. We're going to close out this year with about $50,000 in sales. And as we move forward, we're putting together our team. We expect to grow our customer base to be $250,000 in sales next year when we launch Acre Pay at the end of the first quarter. And then, we will continue with growth in our customers and growing our sales team. And so with that, I think I actually made it close to the 3 minutes. My name is Jim Cogan. I'm the COO. And if you'd like to get a hold of me, my email address, for those who can't see that far, is jim@acre.ag. Thank you.
Well, I don't know about you, but I am feeling inspired. All right, so this is the most difficult thing we're going to ask you to do today. Take out your cell phone and try not to get distracted by all the little red badges that you have on your Messages app and your Instagram app. All right, so now this is your opportunity to vote for one of these 5 amazing entrepreneur teams out of the CIE. In your program, the phone number is there. I'm going to read it out loud if you're more of an auditory learner. It's 541-362-2453. So that is the number to which you are sending a text. And the message that you're going to include in that text is between 1 and 5. So 1, 2, 3, or 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? Very simple. I know I'm complicating it. But you're going to vote 1 for TRIC Robotics. That was our nighttime ultraviolet Roomba. 2 for Novocuff, reducing infant mortality. 3 for Zeste Farms, bringing sexy back to leafy greens. 4 for Artifex. I know the architects in the room are going to be excited about that one. And lastly, 5 for ACREcloud. 5 for ACREcloud. Not Bitcoin. Is the party on bottom and then the business on top? Is that how that's working? Okay. All right, you guys got all that? Wonderful. Well, hey, before we go any further, and while you're finishing up on that, we already talked about the fact that Josh likes to take credit for everything, but we want to recognize a really important person. She is the worker bee behind all of this and makes all of this happen. She's been a huge support to me personally as MC, and that is Stephanie Berteau. So Stephanie, would you please stand up? Not everyone sees all the things you do, Stephanie, but those of us that do know that you're amazing. So thank you so much. All right. With that, we are going to hear another word from our sponsors and our friends over at AMF Media.
Hello, everyone. On behalf of AMF Media Group, we hope you are enjoying the Central Coast Economic Forecast. At AMF, we know that business is all about building relationships and getting close with our clients.
Hey Val, maybe a little too close?
What do you mean, Kara? AMF is a full-service agency.
But you know we have gardening experts here, right? And speaking of experts, let's get back to our next presenter.
All right. I love it. They yielded their time to Chris Thornberg, and I guarantee you he will take it. That's right, folks. The main event, we've got the meat and potatoes coming up here. He doesn't like it when I call him that. Chris Thornberg, he also has an illustrious bio, which I'm going to read for you. So just get comfortable. It's a long one. Let's see. Widely considered to be one of California's leading economists. He's a panel member of the National Association of Business Economists Quarterly Outlook and a contributor to monthly economics polls published by the Wall Street Journal and Reuters. He's on the board of directors for the LA Chamber and an executive member of the Central City Association. He's a member of the California Association of Local Economic Development. Since 2015, he's been the director of the UC Riverside School of Business Center for Economic Forecasting and Development and an adjunct professor at the school. So since we last saw Chris, in addition to running Beacon Economics, he's been directly involved in many research projects across a variety of topics, from housing to jobs to federal stimulus hangover. The U.S. economy is now experiencing to the growing issue of worker scarcity in the United States, which Chris has said has largely been driven by the Great Retirement. I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. Not surprisingly, he's been heavily focused on the question of recession as of late. Will it happen? And when? And is that something we should care about? Finally, he's been deeply involved in numerous industry and policy analyses over the past year, including for the International Franchise Association, the California Apartment Association, the City of LA. And amidst it all, he did find some time to travel to Greece. I actually hear that we got a hold of his B-reel photos from his Greece trip, so we'll be including pictures of Chris in your presentation material after the program today. I hear there's a good one of you in your Speedo, I understand. I'm looking forward to that. All right, Chris, come on up and tell us what's going on.
That way? Really? Chicken? Okay, can you hear me? Yes. All right. Oh, there we go. I'm on. Good morning, everyone. Really? Usually am I not here? You know, I got to tell you, it was interesting. One of the comments that was made just then, I like, meat and potatoes. I like that. Although I would say as I get older and older, it's a little less meat and a little more potato, as the case may be. Let's get some slides up. There we go. All right. It is, as always, wonderful to be back. And let's start out by, again, this is one of my longest running talks. And every time I come here, I always feel just so incredibly welcome. So thank you for being here. Thank you for Central Coast Economic Forecast to continue to work with us over all these years. And with that, let's get right into it. Hey, it's 2022. I've been doing this over a decade, so of course, let's start out with some recession fears. Right? That's how it goes, okay? It's the end of the world. If you've been paying attention to the newspaper headlines the last 4 or 5 months, you've heard about this 98% chance of a global recession. Housing market has just slid into a full-blown correction, says Mark Zandi. Wall Street Journal economists say an over 60% chance of a recession in the next year. Scary stuff, right? Now, look, with that in mind, I do have to acknowledge there are some interesting statistics we've seen in 2022. First half of the year, negative growth. Modest contraction, but nevertheless, it was indeed a contraction. We did get growth in the third quarter. Although overall growth for this year is close to zero. Consumer sentiment, according to the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Survey, has dropped to levels we haven't seen since the middle of the Great Recession. And you look at this and you go, well, that doesn't look terribly good. These are hardly what I would call confidence-inducing statistics. But with that in mind, right off the bat, was the first half of the year a recession? I always love that, right? As soon as we see some negative numbers, the newspapers immediately roll out one of those just silly tropes. What is that? Oh, a recession is defined as 2 quarters of negative growth. Not by any credible economist, for the record, okay? That may work in the context of a newspaper article, but obviously it's not a terribly good definition. Right off the bat, if 2 quarters of negative growth is defined as a recession, turns out the pandemic wasn't a recession, because we had about 8 weeks of negative growth before the economy ricocheted back and started growing again. So clearly that doesn't really work. By the way, what is a recession? That's always a good question. A recession, by the way, is a period of time where because of some sort of market failure, the economy is not living up to its potential. It could produce more output, but it's not for some particular reason. Now, we typically see that in terms of use of resources. People want jobs, but they can't find one. Factories want to produce and sell product, but they don't have any buyers. And so you will typically see these things in terms of heightened unemployment and reduced capacity utilization. Well, as of this morning, the unemployment rate in the U.S. is 3.7%. It's been below 4% for a year now. To be clear, this is tied with the lowest it has really ever been. And as far as industrial production goes, industrial production right now is at an all-time high level, and capacity utilization is, again, back to what you would call a full capacity system. This is not a recession. So clearly, while you may have seen a couple quarters of negative growth, what is going on out there would not be reasonably called a recession. And to be clear, as far as those negative headlines go, so what else is new, right? How about Zandy and his call of market correction? Well, 2 years ago, Zandy was, of course, the guy who told us that 30% of homeowners were going to stop paying their mortgage because of the pandemic. You remember that? Or the pandemic is going to create a depression. 30 to 40 million people are going to be evicted because of the pandemic. Or even the coronavirus pandemic will scar the U.S. labor market for the next decade. What you didn't realize is when they said scar, it meant you weren't going to be able to hire anybody because there was nobody around to hire. Maybe not. But of course, then we go back to 2019, and we had the same set of nonsensical headlines back there calling for the end of the world. And we know what this is, right? Come on. What's the M word? Miserableism, right? Right, exactly. What's wrong with you people this morning? Really? Was the coffee not strong enough? Well, more grounds in the coffee next year, right? Well, this year, by the way, I have a new saying, slightly different one. This year, it's miserableism. It's all fun and games until someone really screws up the economy. And that's really what this devolves into. When you think about the chaos of the economy around us today and everything that's going on, it really does boil around to the narrative of miserableism. Look, not every shock to the economy is an existential crisis. It's not. But in our miserablest world, that is how our policymakers view everything. Look, the pandemic was certainly a tragic episode for the U.S. economy. I get that. Millions of people passed. Lots of families are continue to grieve. But at the same time, it was never that economic existential crisis we pretended it was. It just wasn't. But don't let reality intrude on a good narrative. And lo and behold, Congress and the Federal Reserve went crazy. $6.5 trillion of fiscal stimulus funded with $5 trillion of quantitative easing. It boggles the mind how much money they threw at this economy for no reason. Now, of course, when you do that, what happens? The economy overheats. And when the economy overheats, you get inflation. In other words, inflation is a consequence of overstimulating the economy. But again, don't let reality intrude on a good narrative. Now they're viewing inflation as an existential crisis. And you have, yet again, excessive and dramatic Fed policy and, bizarrely, more fiscal policy that's moving in the exact opposite direction. You know what our policymakers need to do right now? Sit on their hands and do nothing. Stop. You're causing more problems than you're solving. Now, this is not a recession, nor are we doomed to drop into one. Ultimately, so goes the consumer, so goes the U.S. economy. If the consumer is happy, the U.S. economy is happy. And by the way, the consumer doesn't care that much about inflation, and the consumer doesn't care that much about interest rates. The underlying driver of U.S. growth, consumer spending, will proceed given the fundamentals of household finance at this particular point in time. As for supply chains, they're starting to clear. And ultimately, while inflation is a bit of an issue right now, the good news is it will burn out on its own. Again, just sit on your hands and stop pretending to help. Now, with all that in mind, there's no doubt that the financial pressures around us today are quite real. You don't take mortgage rates from sub 3 to over 7 and not see the real estate market swoon. Of course you're going to see that. And you will continue to see that over the course of the next year. And I'm sure Mark Zandi will have plenty of more negative headlines to tell you about it. But with that in mind, the underlying fundamentals of assets, particularly when it comes to housing, still remain strong. This is not 2007. Our real estate markets are not collapsing because of, being overinflated by this bubble. This is more of a frozen pipeline driven by sticker shock. It's a different kind of market. It's not a market that's going to be sort of characterized by massive drops in prices and huge number of foreclosures. More than anything else, it's going to be a market that's going to be very chilly. There's just not going to be a lot going on. Or as I like to put it, in 2010, we didn't have enough buyers. In 2023, we're not going to have enough sellers. Different kind of issue, as the case may be. So, it's not the end of the world. Now, with all that in mind, I don't, for a heartbeat, think I'm standing up here and telling you things are okay. They're not okay. We do have issues. Right off the bat, the economy is brittle. When you have this kind of excessive policy, when you do have this inflation, small shocks to the system can indeed create oversized results. If you look in the mid-'70s and the oil shock that hit the U.S. economy then, it had such a dramatic effect on the economy because we are in such a high inflation environment. So I don't see where the shock is going to come from yet, but I'm worried if one would arise. We have to be careful. This is not a strong economy the way we were in 2019. Of course, we do have the long-run issue of federal debt that we haven't even started to discuss. But the thing that worries me more than anything else is here we are just a few days away from an incredibly contentious midterm election. And we have, again, a degree of political vitriol in this nation that scares me to death. And you know this, I've told this to you before. People always ask me about politics. I am a radical centrist. And at this point in time, the messages, the narratives that both parties are telling us are still largely disconnected from anything resembling reality, ground level reality. And in a world where our narratives, where our politicians, where our newspapers are telling us things that aren't true on Main Street or Wall Street, well, that is a world where weird things can happen. We have to get back to reality. We have to dump the miserableism nonsense and yet again try to get back to addressing the actual issues our nation facing. And, again, we're just not on that track. More than anything else, this scares me to death. So, with all that in mind, as always, too many slides. Let's bounce through them. And I know we're going to have some time for Q&A with Tanner and I at the end of this. So let's jump right into it. A couple years ago, I told you this was going to be a V. And to be clear, what do I mean by a V, by the way? I'm talking about a very rapid recovery. And it was. It was a completely different kind of business cycle. Said that right from the get-go. This was not a traditional business cycle. Hence, the implications were far less severe than, say, what happened during the Great Recession. The Great Recession was an exaggerated version of a typical driver, basically having to do with changes in net wealth. If you want to think what happened during the Great Recession, it was a demand shock downturn. It all boils down to this. Tons of subprime money poured into the economy. People felt rich. They started spending like crazy. But inevitably, that pyramid scheme was going to collapse. It did. And if you really had to sum it up, it all worked like this. In 2006, Americans were like, yeah, I'm rich. In 2009, they're like, oh, damn, I'm not. And the net result of that is everybody had to start saving. And when people are saving, they're not spending. When they're not spending, the economy isn't doing well. And when the economy isn't doing well, it becomes hard to save. That is why it was a 9-year business cycle. 6 quarters down, 7.5 years back up, 9 years for the economy to fully recover from the subprime bubble. This was not that. The pandemic was a supply shock. People didn't go to restaurants in 2010 because they couldn't afford to. They didn't go to restaurants in 2020 because they weren't allowed to. That is a critical difference. The difference is spending that is canceled versus spending that is transferred. In 2010, that was spending that was canceled. We have to save. In 2020, it was spending that was transferred. It was either transferred in the form to future spending in the form of savings, or it got transferred from services over to goods. And if anybody tried to buy a boat, a camper, a hot tub, a bicycle, anything that wasn't nailed down in Home Depot in 2020, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And you never saw that story in the paper, right? You never saw the story in the New York Times about how that bike shop was making record money. No one wants to hear good news. Give them all the scare stories. Well, of course, that's an economy that was going to bounce back, and it absolutely did. But that didn't mean anything to D.C. They live in their own echo chamber, and in their world, everybody in America is suffering tragically. And oh, by the way, it's all because of the other party's policies. Right? And in that world, we have to save everybody. And so Congress got involved, and they put $6.5 trillion in quantitative easing into the economy in 2 years. I'm sorry, a fiscal policy, completely wrong. $6.5 trillion in fiscal stimulus into the economy in 2 short years. $6.5 trillion. Take a look at the left-hand side. This is federal spending as a percent of GDP. Look at our very minimal effort post-Great Recession, which was a real shock compared to what we just did this time around. And I've used this number before, but it's so over the top, I just want to repeat it over and over again. Just think of direct transfers to American households between unemployment and our stimulus checks and the various sorts of other benefits they lobbed in American households. Americans received $2.1 trillion. $2.1 trillion from the federal government. How much money did American households actually lose as a result of the pandemic? My estimate is a little over $800 billion. For every dollar of lost income, the federal government gave us back $2.50. Okay? That's not stimulus. That's trying to buy an election. That's it. There was no justification for this massive quantity of money being put into the economy. No reason for it whatsoever. Now, mind you, one of the real questions is how the hell do you do that? The bond markets are used to the federal government borrowing about $1 trillion a year. How do you go from $1 trillion to $3.25 trillion? A $2.25 trillion in extra borrowing would sink a bond market. There's not that kind of cash out there. Interest rates should have gone through the roof. Why didn't they? You better call Jerome. Mr. Powell was happy to help out. Jerome came in and said, I'll take care of this. Quantitative easing. Now, mind you, I can kind of see his point. Hey, Ben Bernanke did quantitative easing. He just won the Nobel Prize. Not bad, huh? You got to line up for mine, right? But to be clear, I mean, you got to, again, let's a little context here. Ben Bernanke did $3.5 trillion of quantitative easing over about 6 years. This guy did $3 trillion over lunch. And then he did $2 trillion more over the next 2 years, despite there being no sign of any financial crisis. And by the way, that is the rub. When you think about quantitative easing, understand what the tool is for. What is a depression caused by? The answer, by the way, is not a pandemic. That's ridiculous. What causes a depression is a combination of a bad recession with deflation. Deflation, of course, is when the money supply is shrinking, thus causing prices to go down and interest rates to tip towards being negative. A deflationary economy takes the problems of a recession, magnifies them into a depression, and if you think through, say, the Great Depression, the Depression of the 1890s, multiple other depressions in global history, they are invariably linked to deflationary pressures. Now, Ben Bernanke is a student of history, and he understood this. And he understood that if I want to prevent the Great Recession from turning into another depression, I cannot allow deflation to kick in. So you print the money to deal with the deflation. Now, what's interesting about that is, where did the deflation come from? It came from the collapse of the subprime bubble and the collapse in asset prices that followed it. Well, this is my question for this time around. Because back then, well, bank charge-offs were 3% per quarter. Right now, the lending market has never been cleaner than today. Back then, there were record foreclosures and bankruptcies, falling home prices. You had major investment banks going belly up all over the place. This time, nothing happened. What were you doing? Why were you doing it? Oh, I wanted a Nobel Prize. Well, me too, Chief. You got to earn it. Now, look, when you want to understand the difference between then and now, take a look at money supply. M2, broad metric of money supply, best measure about it. And you can see on the left-hand side, if you track your eyes, you can see that the period of time Ben Bernanke, money supply growth, the orange line is 3-year growth rates, stayed nice and steady, about 7% per year, right through the Great Recession. Ben Bernanke did a masterful job keeping money supply growth constant through those financially incredibly turbulent times. Well done, Ben. This time, there was no financial crisis. More quantitative easing went straight into the money supply, a 50% increase in money supply in 3 years. The most rapid increase in money supply the nation has ever seen, including over the course of the 1970s. Although, to be fair, in the 1970s it happened over a decade, not over 2 years. Now, what happens when you pour all that money into the economy? What's amazing about this is that when you think about the study of money supply, when you think about the study of prices, this is one of the oldest topics in economics. They've been studying this for hundreds of years. Milton Friedman wrote books and books and books about this topic. Some that even the people at the Federal Reserve can probably understand if they read them. And the recipe is clear. You overinflate the money supply, and the first thing that happens is everything feels great. Of course it does. Money illusion. People get that money, and they don't think about the long-run consequences. They go, hey, I'm rich. And everybody starts investing and buying. Interest rates fall. Asset prices take off. Consumer spending takes off. Business investment takes off. It's a hell of a party. But this is the issue. It's a hell of a party the same way it's a hell of a party after you finish, about a half a bottle of tequila. Or maybe 4 bottles of red wine from Paso Robles. All right? Whatever the case may be, inevitably, shall we say, it wears off and then begins the hangover. And that's exactly what we're seeing. The hangover is when money illusion gets wiped away and suddenly inflation kicks in. Interest rates start to rise. People recognize they've overdone it and have to pull back on spending. The decline in asset prices cause businesses to pull back on investment. The inevitable hangover starts to crop up, and that is where we are. No more, no less. Now, how does it actually work? Well, of course, it works through, again, the idea that it creates a vision, an illusion of wealth. On the left-hand side, you can see, again, the 3-year growth rate in household net worth. Big increase, massive increase. If you're looking at something on the order of $30 trillion of new household net worth, a little over 25% growth in net worth in a very short period of time. And it's worth noting, it's not just the rich people, okay? I wasn't going to say that Amazon guy again. I think we'll leave him out of it for the rest of today. But you can see wealth levels at the bottom, 50% of households went up by over 100%. So yeah, a lot of money. Everybody feels real good. And again, think about those. The last 3 big surges. You had the dot-com surge in the late 90s, the subprime surge, and now you got the Jerome surge. Okay? So it's a very similar pattern. Big increase in net worth. And, well, with that in mind, no wonder the debt markets look so good over the last couple of years. People have tons of money. Credit card debt, easy to pay off. Everybody refied at these incredibly low mortgage rates. And mortgage debt isn't all that big of a deal. Bank loans, again, super clean. Of course they are. You pour that much cash on the economy, and things are going to look good. But it's also a binging economy. The trade deficit hit 5% of GDP. The only time the U.S. trade deficit has been larger than 5% of GDP was back in 2005 when it was 6% of GDP, driven, of course, by the subprime bubble. And this enormous increase in demand for goods that we can't produce, again, coming from the rest of the world, look at real non-petroleum imports and how they surged. By the way, this is why we had supply chain problems. We kept hearing about we had supply chain problems because, I don't know, because of COVID or this or that. The problem with our supply chains is our supply chains were never designed for this degree of consumption. It was beyond our capacity. Now we're starting to catch up. That's the good news, right? The boats are catching up. They're clearing out. We're starting to see the backlogs go away. Costs of containers are starting to come down. But remember, all this was driven really by the fact that we just weren't designed for this degree of demand. Perhaps these supply chain problems were good at some level because it prevented us from exhibiting our worst impulses, as the case may be. Held this back a bit. But of course, inevitably, it also turns into inflation, rising prices. An economist once said, and such a wonderful quote, inflation is nothing more than the consequence of too many dollars chasing too few goods. Very simple. And it's not just us, by the way. The whole world is experiencing inflation at some level because most central banks overdid it at some level. It wasn't just our central bank that did this. The European central bank did this, the UK central bank, the Japanese central bank. You can go on and on and on how we saw this same pattern of behavior over and over again. What's funny about this is, as obvious as this is, the narrative in DC does not allow for this conversation. You can't say this out loud. Again, Janet Yellen, incredibly good economist. I know she is. I mean, not only does she have a tremendous academic track record, she's married to a Nobel Prize winner. She knew Milton Friedman. But you can't say the reality out loud. So what do? They stand up and say things like, oh, it's supply chains. That's why we have inflation. It's the federal deficit. Oh, it's greedy corporations. It's not enough manufacturing jobs. Biden's bad green energy policies. Putin's fault. Thank you, Mr. Putin. It's your fault now. Really? Yeah, you got to wonder what's next. No, it's because Saturn isn't aligned with Jupiter. Kids should never have jumped Kanye. The Rams, it's their horrible front line. That's why we have inflation. If they could just protect Stafford, what are you thinking? Milton Friedman said it. Inflation is always a monetary phenomenon. This is known, but they can't say it out loud. You're not allowed to in this miserable world. In their world, everybody's suffering. But to say that inflation is a monetary phenomenon is the equivalent of saying Americans are spending too much. No one's ever won office telling people, sorry, you need to settle down and stop spending so much, okay? This is why you don't elect your parents. and you can see this, of course, with just gas, right? We keep hearing how gas prices are killing Americans. To be clear, gas prices went at the national level from $2 a gallon to $5 a gallon in about a year and a half period from the beginning of 21 to the middle of 2022. Over that period of time where gas prices went from $2 a gallon to $5 a gallon, the consumption of gasoline went up. Vehicle miles driven went up. Just look at vehicle miles driven. With all those increase in gas prices and vehicle miles driven went up. This is not supply, people. This is demand. Okay? Look at the price of cars. If gasoline was so expensive and crushing Americans, why are car prices through the roof? And this, of course, gets back to these ridiculous inflation forecasts they come out with month after month after month. And it's incredibly funny because it always works like this. They say, oh, well, inflation's going to come down now. We're done. We're past peak inflation. Why is that? Well, oil prices are coming down. Oh, there you go. And then, of course, the inflation number comes out, and it's higher than they expected, and then the stock market goes crazy and swoons, and everybody's clasping their hands and going, ah! Well, look, if you think it's a supply phenomenon, you're going to get it wrong every single time. If you recognize it's a demand phenomenon, you won't. And understand what happens. What do I mean by it's a demand phenomenon? Well, gas prices went down, which means you spend less money to fill up your car. And what do you do with that extra money? You go spend it over here. And you cause the price of something else to go up. Demand will always push prices up somewhere when there's excessive demand. Simple as that. Now, how much farther will inflation go? When will excessive demand wear itself out? Well, the answer from my perspective is about 15 to 25% more inflation. 15 to 25%, which, by the way, is not an insignificant amount. It's a couple years of higher than normal inflation in front of us. 15 to 25%, and then it burns out. Then prices are re-equilibrated with the money supply and the size of the economy. Everything's back in that kind of equilibrium. And that's more or less probably what we need to do. Just let it run its course. It's the only way you're going to get demand back in line with what our economy can actually produce in real terms. Let it burn out. Let prices go up. But no, the Federal Reserve is acting as if inflation is a fundamental threat, is an existential threat to American households. And so they're cranking up the federal funds rate because that's what you do to stop inflation. Well, this, of course, is having a really profound influence on our economy. Interest rates are up. As noted, mortgage rates are above 7%. The yield curve is absolutely flattened. The 10-year Treasury is above 4%. Cheap money's behind us, largely driven by Fed policy. And yeah, that is, of course, interfering in the financial markets. The stock market has come down 20% or so, give or take. It's hard to tell. Every 2 days, it's another 5% one way or the other. It's so volatile. But to be clear, you know, I always come to these events and I have some come up to me and they'll start talking about how much they've lost over the last year. Oh, this is terrible. When do you think the markets are going to come back? I lost a lot of money in the last year. And I go, yeah, how are you doing relative to 3 years ago? Oh, never mind. Yeah, shut up, people. How greedy can you get? It went up by 60% and down by 20%. That's not a bear market. That's called returning to something resembling rationality. Something resembling rationality, because PE ratios are still too high. Of course, now everybody's talking about how billion-dollar IPOs are disappearing. Venture capital cooled off pretty sharply. You know, huge new funding of venture capital in 2021. But honestly, does anybody really think that there was a doubling of good ideas from 2020 to 2021? Do you really think that, I guess we're all just sitting around doing nothing, so we have all these great new ideas. No, it's just stupid money chasing stupid ideas. Nothing more, nothing less. Of course it was going to cool off. And yes, Bitcoin. Oh, God. What's the guy's name again? What's his name? Ethan. All right. When you see Ethan next, tell him, just do this for me. Just tell him, Ponzi, P-O-N-Z-I, Italian guy. Lived in the early part of last century. Interesting story. Every generation, I guess, has to learn it, right? My generation, we have Beanie Babies. A little less dangerous, if you ask me. So here we are in 2022. We're facing, of course, the big impact of really what seems to be strong consumer demand, but very high interest rates. And you see it, right? Residential investment is a big negative on our economy this year. Structures are cooling off dramatically as well. We are seeing non-durables cool off. But other parts of the economy are strong. Personal consumption is still good. Spending on equipment and intellectual property, which is important for California's economy, is doing pretty well right now. So it's a real mixed bag. It's a real mixed bag, what's going on out there. Now, when you think about the consumer, again, always start with the consumer. If the consumer is strong, they can push the economy through pretty much anything. 70% of GDP. Where's the consumer? As far as I'm concerned, far from, shall we say, disappearing, there's still pent-up demand. They're still behind the curve. Look at autos. Auto sales have been 3-4 million units below annual averages for over a year now. Over a year. And it's not because people don't want to buy cars. There's nothing to buy. The most recent statistic we have suggests that there are slightly over 100,000 cars for sale in the entire United States. In 2017, it was 1.2 million. There's still nothing to buy. Trust me, consumer spending numbers would be stronger if there were things to actually purchase. which there's not at this point in time. Travel's back in a big way. We know that. But again, it's an interesting shift. Americans are going abroad like crazy right now. Foreign travel is 14% below where it was pre-pandemic. Foreign visitors coming to the United States is still down 44%. Now, the good news is international employments are starting to come back. They are starting to come back slowly but surely, even with the dollar strong. But nevertheless, again, you can see people are really out there enjoying life. We've had a big shift. One of the reasons non-durables is soft is because people are spending more money on services. Restaurant spending is through the roof right now, whereas groceries, of course, have cooled off a bit. Hotels are pretty busy. Not always. The gateway cities like San Francisco are still pretty quiet, but the secondary markets are actually looking really strong. If you think consumers are suffering, I have one place for you to go. And tell me that out loud. Las Vegas. Look at gaming revenues in Las Vegas right now. This is through September. Okay? Never have gaming revenues in Vegas been higher than they are. They're 25% higher now than they were pre-pandemic. Without a full return to the conventions, without Chinese visitors coming in. That is my one statistic that I will pay attention to. When that goes down, we can start worrying about the consumer. And as for this, we're suffering the scourge of inflation. Oh, God, we are such whiny babies. It just makes me crazy. We've had 1 year of bad inflation, people. 1 year. After 4 years of low inflation. On 5 years, 16% inflation. That's exactly what it was in 2008. Get over yourself, people, really. And as far as interest rates going up, I know nominal interest rates have come up sharply. And that changes, again, a lot of the vision. But real interest rates are still negative. If you take interest rates and subtract inflation, it's negative. For example, if you go out and borrowed $100 today, yes, you maybe pay 4 or 5% over a 1 year for that, but the inflation rate's 6%. That means at the end of the year, in real terms, for the $100 you borrow, you pay back $98. It's a hell of a deal when you think about it that way, right? So no, inflation rates are not the end of the world. Can they hack it? Can they handle Federal Reserve policy and rising interest rates? Here are two graphs. These are probably the two most important pictures I'll show you today. Left-hand side is the financial obligations ratio, the share of household income spent on rent and mortgage payments and credit card payments and student loan payments. That was at an all-time high prior to the Great Recession. It is now at an all-time low level outside of some of the weirdnesses during the course of the pandemic. And by the way, most of that is mortgage debt, and most of that is 30-year fixed rates. In other words, not going to change. So no, higher interest rates aren't really hitting households all that hard. You know what is pushing households? On the right-hand side. Let me explain this graph. It's a little hard to read because it's so